Welcome to Follow to Lead, where we discover how to listen for and follow God's call so that we might lead others to God. Our shared stories of inspiration from religious leaders and those active in the educational ministry of the Church can help you know better how God is calling you and the role passionate Catholic education plays in spreading His message of faith, hope, and love. Now please welcome the hosts of Follow to Lead, Father Randy Sly and Kyle Pietrantonio.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Christ the teacher, teach us to listen. Teach us to do the deep listening to the sounds of our soul, waiting to hear your voice calling us to cast out deeper, to become fishers of men and women, shepherds of souls, to follow your will in order to lead others to the truth, beauty, and goodness only you can offer. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Welcome to Follow to Lead, a journey twice a month into the world of Catholic education and our faith, and exploring what it means to follow God in order to lead others to Him. I'm Father Randy Sly, your host. And today we will be talking with Thomas Carroll, the founder and president of the Catholic Talent Project, which is a brand new venture. And for the past 5 years, he served as Superintendent of Catholic Schools for the Archdiocese of Boston, one of the largest Catholic school systems in the nation. And there he oversaw almost 100 Catholic schools, serving more than 32,000 students and employing about 3,000 teachers, school leaders, and support staff. And in his 5 years, Tom presided over what the National Catholic Register called a renaissance of Catholic education. And some of his key achievements included a focus on recruiting talent and faithful school leaders and teachers to increase the Catholic identity of the Catholic schools in the Boston area. And that also included the founding of the St. Thomas More Teaching Fellows Initiative. He also has increased and stabilized the enrollment and finances of Boston's Catholic schools for almost after a 60-year decline, and creating a sense of optimism for the future of Catholic education. Prior to that, he ran a highly successful network of urban charter schools in New York's capital city of Albany, and also oversaw 2 Catholic scholarship funds in Albany and New York City. He founded and led a free market think tank, more than one, I guess, Tom, and advocacy organizations that served in various capacities. He also served as the New York Governor's Deputy Director of Regulatory Reform and lobbied for religious liberty and school choice in our nation's capital. He holds a Master of Arts degree and Bachelor of Arts degrees from the University of Albany. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be with you, Father Randy.
And Tom, why don't we begin by telling us a little bit about yourself, about your upbringing, and just kind of how you grew in your faith.
Sure. I grew up on Long Island in New York, originally raised as a Lutheran. On my mother's side, the family's originally from a German Lutheran family from Iowa in the Midwest. And then along the way, stopped going to church and was agnostic for a time. Always had kind of Catholic life beliefs on certain issues like sanctity of life. And then married my wife, who's Catholic, and then began a journey towards Catholicism that culminated about 20 years ago, me converting to Catholicism. And then my faith in the last 5 years that I've spent in Boston has gotten much deeper, partly because of the line of work I'm in, and the young people that I've recruited. Their faith has been truly inspirational, and just met some of the most spectacular priests that I've ever met in my life in Boston. So it's been a fabulous. I've always tell people when I recruit them that Boston is a great place, even though it's the broader culture is secular. That if you're intending to grow your faith, there are few places as good as Boston to do it, just because of all the resources and apostolates, and the quality of clergy there is extraordinary.
Well, there's a lot of change taking place right now up there. New archbishop and now a new superintendent of Catholic schools. And one of the things I think you must be glad about is to leave that sense of optimism with those that are kind of taking on those leadership roles. Uh, can you tell me when you went to Boston 5 years ago, what your vision was when you arrived and how you began to really unfold your work there?
You mentioned the optimism. I think the first thing is a state of mind, which is I don't think you draw people together behind a common mission if you're selling despair. So
Right.
Cardinal Dolan once said, you have to understand his Irish sense of humor to realize he didn't mean this as his desired state, but he was once quoted in America Magazine saying, Catholic education has become hospice care. We know the patient's dying and we're just managing the pain on the way out. And I think a lot of people actually believe that all across the country. They believe that the church is playing a losing hand and the Catholic schools are a losing proposition. I simply don't agree with it. I think Catholic schools, properly ordered, have an amazing future in this country. And I frankly think the Catholic schools are the only institution, now that I've been part of senior staff of a pretty large archdiocese and seen everything that we do, I think Catholic schools are uniquely positioned to lead the renewal of the Catholic Church for the simple reason that the biggest crisis we're facing is a crisis of faith among the young,
Hmm.
and it's among school age kids. So roughly you have, this is based on the Georgetown Carroll studies, by the time kids are 13, these are children within Catholic families, 50% of them lose their faith. By the time they're 18, 86% lose their faith. So we have them in Catholic schools for 16,000 hours from preschool until their graduation day, often. Most of those are waking hours, maybe not a couple math classes here or there, but it's a tremendous amount of time. So it isn't about coming up with a snappy 2-minute sales pitch. We have
Right.
them for a tremendous amount of time, and we get them when they're completely pure and open to any conversation and any belief. And so the fact that you have that level of disbelief by the end of it, one, I think, is a warning sign, a five-alarm fire, if you will, for the church, which is if we have an 86% failure rate in keeping the young with our church, there is no church in a generation. We're going to go the way
Right.
of Europe, in which churches are backdrops for fancy weddings and for clever Instagram photos. But there isn't a lot of faith going on. There'll always be small pockets of faith all over the place. But that's not what we're all about. And so we have a foundation of 1.6 million children in Catholic schools. And I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ started with 12, one betrayed him,
Yeah.
and end up we have more than 1 billion Catholics around the world. So I think for a starting point, we're starting at a level that was a much more fertile starting point than what Jesus and the apostles faced originally. But we are, there's a book that I've bought for so many people by Monsignor James Shea at University of Mary in Bismarck and the Dakotas. And the title of the book is roughly From Christendom to the Apostolic Age.
It's a
And the
fantastic
point of
book.
the book,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's a quick read, so I recommend it. It's just over 100 pages, I think. But basically, a lot of us grew up at a time in which, Christendom, which meaning the basic premises of the Catholic Church were accepted by everybody, including quaint things like God created man and woman. And now the foundational beliefs of the Catholic Church, like almost every major moral teaching of the Catholic Church, is now considered a controversial proposition. So we are in many ways back to the age of the apostles, in which we have a lot of non-believers, and our job is to go forth, like St. Paul and many others. Hopefully we don't all get martyred along the way, but that our job is to go forth and preach the word of God and bring people to accept God at the center of their life. And we need to start with children. And much in the way that the people on the secular side are coming up with the wackiest curriculums and teachings in public school setting, they're in Massachusetts included, they're doing sex ed down to preschool. And the reason they're doing that is they understand that whichever team wins over the children, the future belongs to them. And so I think we need to, they're not, the other side isn't being stupid, they're being very clever. And I think we're being a little too complacent because the church has been around 2,000 years, thinking that we can't kind of lose our way. So I'm optimistic there is a way forward, but it does require us to change what we're doing. And it requires us to make sure that the schools are properly ordered. In many cases, I don't think they are right now.
Do you think that there is still a preponderance of Catholic schools that see themselves as kind of a private school that just has kind of a Catholic, uh, I guess, alignment or Catholic connection?
Yeah, I think some of them are essentially private academies with a religion class tacked on. Some of them are frankly more accurately described as public schools with a a tacked on of religion. So I think what we have to do is to go back and not worry about casting blame here or there, but just say what we're doing is not working right now, right? The first step to recovery is
Sure.
admitting you have a problem, right? And so when you have an 86% failure rate, there's no way not to admit that you have a problem if you're being honest with yourself. And the question is, what would it take given how much? It's not that we need more time. We have plenty of time with these kids. We actually have the kids more waking hours than their parents have them.
Hmm.
So first, it's a frame of mind. We have to concede that these children belong to their parents, which a lot of people in public schools simply don't even accept that basic point anymore. But it's a foundational belief of the Catholic Church, and it's accurate. And then second, we have to decide that Catholic schools do a lot of things, and they should. But the most important thing is to bring children closer to God and set them on a path to eternal salvation. If we get everything else right and we get that wrong, then we have failed. And so I think we're focused on the things that don't matter as much, and we're not focused on the things that matter the most. So once you make that decision and you decide that evangelization is the key, then you have to honestly look at the people around you and say, is this the team that will get the job done? So, as a sports analogy, I'm not really a sports person, but say if a billionaire bought an NFL franchise and called me up and said, I would like you to get me to the Super Bowl next year. Money's no object. And the next day I flew out to Wimbledon and hired the best tennis players in the world. And then I put them on a football field. They would get destroyed, right? They would never win a game. They would never get
Right.
to the Super Bowl. So much in the same way, I'm not saying that the people who are doing the job now aren't talented. They are. I'm not saying that they're not well-meaning. I'm not even saying that they're not faithful. But I'm saying they do. What we need is what Pope Paul VI called for in the mid 70s, in which he said, modern man more willingly listens to witnesses than to teachers. And if he listens to teachers, it's because they're witnesses. So we need to say, if I was a school leader, I would have to reflect honestly, have I put a witness to the Catholic faith in every single classroom in my building? And if you have, God bless you. If you haven't, you have some work to do. And so, and I always tell people that prudence is the most underrated virtue. So I'm not suggesting that somebody go out and fire their entire staff and remake the school 5 minutes later. It's a recipe for destroying a school. But one of the upsides of high turnover in Catholic schools is that you can also turn over the faculty of a Catholic school without firing an awful lot of people. And so if people are, as openings occur, what I always recommend to principals I hire, every time a lukewarm person walks out the door, you should drop to your knees in your office, scream hallelujah. You don't have to explain to anybody why, but rather than complaining, they're like, oh my gosh, I have to interview 20 people. This is such a pain. You should be grateful that you've been given the opportunity to go out and find a witness that you can be put in front of a bunch of children and potentially save their souls. There's nothing that school leader will do that'll be more important than the decision they make in that moment. And so I think it's a lot of it is about a frame of mind. So in Boston, what we did is we took advantage of very high attrition. I was very explicit about the kind of people I was looking for because I was looking for people, that were smart and had the educational background and all the rest. But I was looking for people that were committed to evangelization. And surprisingly, you'll find a lot of people who are very faithful don't think that Catholics should be evangelizing anybody. They believe that's what the Mormons do. That's what the Hare Krishnas used to do in airports before TSA kicked them out when we started putting in, you had to have tickets before you could be behind the security gate. So, but it is our central. So if you don't believe that, that's fine. That doesn't mean you're not a faithful person. It just means that you're not the right person to be leading an institution that is focused on evangelization, because that is our most important job. So, and then one by one, as we started putting in the St. Thomas More teaching fellows, we noticed a couple things. One, in those classrooms, magic was happening and kids were getting converted. And then the second thing that happened is people in the schools that were faithful but had been silenced over time. In many cases, they censored themselves. They didn't feel that they could really be talking about openly about their faith, to a bunch of kids. And when they saw that people were doing it, that the school leader was encouraging it and that the superintendent was encouraging it, then suddenly it emboldened a bunch of people to do what perhaps they should have been doing all along. And so pretty quickly, even without replacing half of the people in the school, schools started flipping and changed dramatically from secular schools to dramatically more faithful Catholic schools. And
So
then,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
good.
I was just assuming
No,
then
and,
that the St. Thomas
yeah.
More Teaching Fellowship was the source that you used for infusing the schools with new teachers.
Yeah, so it was the name I gave to the effort. I was somewhat crazily just zigzagging all across the country and also talking to people in other countries if I could find a talented person doing missionary work overseas that I knew wanted to come back to the United States, or dealing with people with immigration issues and trying to get them in to be teachers if they, we had somebody of their nationality, and not enough teachers that like spoke the language of an immigrant group that we needed to have. But at any rate, so I called those people St. Thomas More Teaching Fellows because one, the fellowship suggests that they would be part of a larger group of people working in fellowship. So when they were coming to Boston, they weren't the only one coming. They were coming almost like a cohort of people that signed up for the Peace Corps. I sometimes refer to this as the Catholic Peace Corps or the
Okay.
Catholic Teach for America, right? I'm looking for people with missionary zeal. And I say, like, if you want, you could go, if you have missionary zeal and you want to bring the word of God to a child, you could go to Zimbabwe and be the first person to bring the word of God to the natives, or you could come to Boston. It's pretty much the same job these days, which is like the secular backdrop of not just the Northeast, but great swaths of the country are really missionary territory. So we bring them, I convince them, I'll go before a room full of people who are, joke, I'm becoming the Full Employment Act for unemployed liberal arts majors. But I'll convince a lot of people that never plan on becoming teachers to become teachers because they are missionary and that's what's motivating, but they don't know how to tap into that or what kind of job where they could, exercise that motivation that they have. And I explained to them that they've been given this gift of faith by the Holy Spirit and their parents. And it's something that they shouldn't throw, at the feet of people that openly mock their faith. They could go work at some big six accounting firm or investment bank and make $150,000 a year, have an office, a skyscraper with the view of the ocean. But if they wanted to go to mass, at noontime, they would not find anybody on that 20th floor that's going to follow them into a church. And so they have to decide, like, do they want to be part of a community of people that have the common mission of reaching children and bringing them to God? And if you do, there's only so many places you could do that. And I think teaching you obviously could be get involved as a director of religious education in a church or what have you. But I think teaching is a really great way to do it. And then when we recruit them, we pay for their housing while we're training them up. But once that's done, they go into private apartments like anybody else moving to a big city. And we encourage them all to have roommates. And we strongly encourage, and all of them have done this, to only have roommates who are also fellows or are also teachers in the schools that they're going into. So if they have a bad day, which almost every new teacher has pretty frequently in their first year, when they come home and they couldn't get, Johnny to stop talking or sit down or whatever he was supposed to be doing, and they seemingly think they've tried everything, they should lay out the fact pattern to their roommates. And their roommates probably had similar problems and may have tried other ideas. And you get this kind of automatic like peer group that's supporting each other. And I joke to the guys, they're like, you think the only one who's going to be reduced to tears are the female teachers, but you'll be crying much more intensely than the women are much sturdier than you guys are. So, like, everybody's going to have a bad day. So, you have to have the disposition that you're strapping on your cross and you're doing this for something bigger than yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to stick with it. But if you do that, you will see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then it will become easier. And then when you start seeing kids convert, and the only reason they came to God was because of you, there's nothing more exhilarating than that
Hmm.
feeling. There's nothing you could do that'd be like that in your life. And then someday you may decide you want to make a lifetime of this, and I hope you do. We ask them to come for 2 years. But if you don't, I also think it's great preparation for being parents. You'll learn a great deal about child psychology. You'll learn about the profound differences between boys and girls. You'll learn that there is a thing called boys and girls, and they act very different, and which is obvious to anybody who's had children.
Yeah.
But for people who have not yet had children, they're sometimes surprised by some of this stuff. And sometimes people, as parents, overreact to what are really developmental differences between boys and girls. They think the boys are dumb or they need to get some kind of special services where it's just a developmental differences. So a lot of that stuff is, I joke, I said, you can learn all this stuff on somebody else's dime, make all your mistakes with somebody else's kids before you have your own. But, and it has for the people that have become parents already. So we have had, because I have a community I've built of people that share a common faith and all want to get married and have kids and raise them in virtue, that it's a pretty good place to find your soulmate. And so a number of people, I've been to more weddings than I've been to in 25 years. And so
Right.
I've been going to weddings all the time. It's that and baby showers. My wife and I are going to have to file for bankruptcy. But it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. And I think and to a person, they think the experience of being a teacher is going to help them as a parent as well. So
Yeah.
I just think it's a beautiful thing for them to do. I think it's one of the last high prestige
Hmm.
positions left in America. There's no parent who's going to be upset that you're becoming a Catholic school teacher. And because the Catholic Talent Project will be helping staff, educators, and physicians all the way up the food chain within a diocese, you have the ability to make more money over time as you shift into different positions and so forth. So if you're not making enough when you start out, there's plenty of different ways for you to make more money and still stay within the school system.
So the Catholic Talent Project uh, basically is kind of an outgrowth of the St. Thomas More Teaching Fellowship to more of
Yeah,
a
so I
national
start
perspective.
right exactly. So I started with I had to replace principals because that was my job as a superintendent. So it didn't start out as like a like deliberate, plot, if you will. I had to find people, but then I quickly found out what I was looking for. And then the Supreme Court issued a decision called Our Lady of Guadalupe, named after a school by that name in California. And they had a religious liberty challenge to some kind of employment, the case they had. And I don't know if they dismissed somebody because they were doing something contrary to church teaching, whatever it was. But anyway, it resulted in the Supreme Court issuing a decision saying that any religious institution could use religious criteria in hiring, which is obvious. Like you can't be a Muslim and become a Catholic priest, right?
Right.
Unless you convert to Catholicism, right? So what the court basically said, well, with teachers, it's similar. That's also part of the church's mission of evangelizing. It's not just priests, but teachers have a pretty substantial role. So that same kind of religious liberty applies in the hiring around them. So that happened. I was in job about 11 months when that decision came down. And so that allowed me to really do an amazing job at screening people based on religion.
Hmm.
And every time I interviewed people and asked all these questions that in a private sector, if I was running a corporation, they would be illegal questions because they would be inappropriate. Like if you were a data analyst in a company, there'd be no reason they should be asking you about religion. But if you're taking a job where one of your primary responsibilities is evangelizing children in a particular faith, they're completely legitimate questions. So I explained it to everybody so nobody gratuitously like filed a lawsuit or something. So I've survived all of that, but it's that's something that I don't think enough people know about, and I don't think people spend enough time. People often ask, like, "Are you a Catholic in good standing?" And what that means is, can you get a letter from a pastor saying you go to church on a somewhat regular basis?
Right.
Those letters are handed out like candy by parish secretaries everywhere in America because they don't want to offend somebody and they don't keep track of attendance at every single mass. So they don't actually know if you're going to every single mass, right? So at any rate, it's not particularly reliable. But the question isn't just, are you faithful? The question is, do you have the disposition and the skill set and the personality to evangelize? Those are two different things. The bare minimum is you have to be faithful and you have to believe in the moral teachings of the Catholic Church. We've hired all across the country a lot of people in Catholic schools that consider themselves to be Catholic, that don't agree with everything from Humanae Vitae forward, and increasingly don't agree in Genesis. God created man and woman, right?
Right.
So those are pretty big moral teachings
Yeah.
of the Catholic Church. You can't hire somebody who doesn't agree on that stuff and expect them to do a good job evangelizing. So kids may be short when they're little, but they're not stupid and they can see hypocrisy from a mile away. So if somebody's like going through the act of like saying what they're required to say because we force them to say it, but they don't believe it, or they're on social media, shacking with somebody in a hotel room in Cabo, and the kids see that, or you have anyway, I won't go into all the litany of things that I've seen, but we need to have people who really are, as St. Paul VI said, who are witnesses, and that's what we really need. So anyway, so I started doing that, and then separately I found out, well, they couldn't find the people that I hired as principals were going to education schools to hire teachers, which on the face of it makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you go to a teacher's college? But what you have to think about for a minute is that teacher colleges are higher education institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Most higher education institutions have gone stark raving mad of late particularly the last 5 years. And they've gotten, since the whole Black Lives Matter stuff and a few other movements, they've gotten very kind of woke or politically correct, whatever phrase you want to use. And so a lot of the people under 30 tend to be willing to proselytize, but they want to proselytize politics and ideology. And I'm completely allergic to anyone talking about politics in a Catholic school. Our franchise is the transcendent. It's not partisan politics. I don't care whether it's, which party you're in favor of or an independent party. It doesn't make a difference to me. It's like there is no business of a teacher ever sharing like which party they're in favor of or which candidate or which ideological cause of the day they're really excited about. They're supposed to be, teaching what they're supposed to teach, and they're all supposed to be bringing children to God. And those are both very time consuming, and they should keep the rest of it. They could, get a beer and talk to their friends about the rest of it, but they shouldn't be proselytizing kids on politics. So anyway, I started saying, and I'm not saying don't ever hire somebody out of an education school, but I'm saying you do have to be very conscious that just because they've been credentialed to be a teacher doesn't mean that they meet the other qualifications that we should demand in a Catholic school, even if it's a Catholic education school, because the biggest part of their market are people that are going off to work in the cookie cutter unionized public schools. So they're preparing people with a district school lens, not all Catholic schools, but most Catholic schools, because they have to for economic reasons. So you have to understand those dynamics. So anyway, so I started recruiting, and then I said, well, it needs to have more structure. And then so I set up a fellowship, and then we set up, how you apply and exactly the criteria we were looking for and where we were going to look for them and how we were going to train them up, how we were going to place them. And then we had a theory of change, which is if we're going to recruit all these people, because we have 3,000 teachers in Boston. So over time, I've recruited about 50 fellows that have been hired. So this is like a lot, this will take a long time. It was a lot easier to replace 75% of the principals than to replace 75% of the teachers. So it's going to take some time, to do that. So we had to decide strategically, like, do we just spread them thinly or do we consolidate them in particular schools? So we decided to consolidate them so that when they went in, sometimes we've sent people in that are particularly strong, just they're only kind of missionary in that school to kind of just start things moving. But more often we send 2 or 3 people in at a time. And I think it's a better way to do it. I think the companionship works a lot better. Hold on a second, just my throat's dry. So anyway, we had to sort out all these considerations. And then we had to pick a saint. So there's, as you know, the Catholic Church has quite a lot of saints. So, and I just think Thomas More, because one, obviously he was Catholic, but he took education very seriously. He took the education of his children extremely seriously.
Right.
And he was willing to take a stand, I mean, to the point literally of death. And even when his wife and his children, even his daughter Meg, who was his prized child, signed the oath of fidelity to Henry VIII and came to him, and in so many words, his wife said, can't we go back to having a nice house, the fancy parties, go and hang out with the king all the time? Like, just sign the darn paper, right? So, and I'm sure it must have been like a cutting moment for him. But anyway, he was asked by his wife, Henry VIII arranged for two people to be guillotined outside the window while his wife was visiting. And she goes, like, do you want that to be your fate? Like, what do you think about what just happened? And so many words. He says, I'm envious. And she looks at him somewhat stunned that God chose to bring them home to him sooner than he's having me come home to him, or words to that effect.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of, I think that's the kind of personality. And it also, and I don't know if St. Thomas More actually said it, but it's in the movie, in which he's asked, I forget the name of the character in the movie A Man for All Seasons, where the relative is trying to become a judge, and he says, why don't you become a teacher? And then I think was it Richard? Anyway, he says, well, who would know if I was a good teacher? Like, he was going to the vanity of being a judge to be as famous as St. Thomas More. And then St. Thomas More says, God, pretty good audience, that.
Oh, that is great. Well, tell me now.
So that's why we picked that particular saint.
Yeah. So you had the St. Thomas More Teaching Fellowship, which is now kind of enlarging itself into more of a nationwide, I guess, or perhaps larger movement called the Catholic Talent Project. How does your project work with dioceses and schools then?
Right. So we're starting out with 2 dioceses. We're just, because I know everybody, we're continuing to work in Boston. We have a lot of schools that have asked us to keep supplying them with teachers. And then secondly, based on conversations, I had very long conversations with Archbishop Cordileone in San Francisco. He was very interested in being the first location outside of Boston. And then he hired a fabulous guy who actually helped run retreats for the St. Thomas More program. He's a theology teacher from Portsmouth Abbey, a boarding school in Rhode Island, and also ran the Portsmouth Institute. Just a tremendous guy, big fan of classical schools, and very broadly educated. So he has a spectacular superintendent now who just started July 1st. So we just signed a partnership agreement with San Francisco to make them the second location. And then, so we're basically looking for bishops that are interested in taking this approach. There are 175 bishops that have schools in their diocese. And then we're looking for people that, this is not without controversy. Sometimes the people that are already in the schools don't like all of these people that are being stuffed into the schools. Over time, people have learned to appreciate what we're doing, that are actually in the schools where we've placed them. And the principals have been overjoyed with it. And even though, like, our professors in the seminaries, when they talk to some of these kids, some of them have volunteered to be spiritual directors for some of the St. Thomas More fellows, and they're just blown away by these kids. So, but initially there is some controversy and some pushback, and certainly the education schools didn't like the idea of hiring people outside of the normal route. So in my case, Cardinal O'Malley, every time I was challenged on any matter of religion, but anything to do with this program, he backed me up. So I don't want to go into an area where we don't have that similar backstop in the form of the bishop, archbishop, or cardinal. So that's far and away the most important thing. Second, we're trying over time to create a geographic diversity. So we're going to do two dioceses a year until we have 10 dioceses by the end of in our 5th year. And then, so I expect I already have a lot more than 10 dioceses that are vying for us to come into them. And then we will do all of the recruiting. In some cases, like in San Francisco, the superintendent wants to do some of the recruiting for some of the California schools. So he and I and some of our recruiters will do that jointly. And then and the training program, we train them over the summer, roughly a 6-week program. Some of that will be done centrally for all of our fellows across the country, no matter how many dioceses we're in. But some of the stuff, like basic things like teaching people how to do a lesson plan and how to manage children in a classroom, there are people within each diocese that obviously any large diocese has hundreds, if not thousands of teachers who know how to teach people to do that kind of stuff. We focus a lot on the theology and the kind of educational philosophy because we're not pushing a progressive John Dewey or a vocational approach to education. We're specifically teaching through a Catholic worldview or Catholic anthropology.
Right.
So we want to make sure that people understand that up front. And then some of the other stuff, it doesn't really, we have definite opinions because we've tried a bunch of different things on what works and what doesn't work. But we're sure we can find local talent in a lot of these dioceses. So some of those individual aspects of who does what when, we also send mentors in. We do basically from the moment we sign somebody up as a fellow, we're in charge of arranging their formation as an educator, and not just for 2 years, as long as they're an educator, and their formation spiritually.
Wow.
So we tell them what priests that we think they would be comfortable with. We arrange spiritual directors. If somebody's a traditional Latin Mass person, we'll connect them to the traditional Latin Mass community within the diocese. And we run retreats. We just believe that even though we're only hiring super faithful people, that I think people's spiritual life has to be constantly nourished and tended to.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Boston, I had the advantage. I knew we have a lot of priests here, and I knew a very high percentage of them. In other areas, we're going to rely on the superintendent, the archbishop, to give us some guidance. We also know which parishes are the best young adult programs, the most, active adult programs,
mm-hmm.
because they automatically came in. They knew the 50 fellows, if you will, but they also wanted to get piped in specifically into church communities, and they were looking for specific kind of experiences. And so we had to navigate all that. And a lot of them were drawn to in Boston. We have spectacular churches, like some of the most jaw-dropping churches. And our chapel in the St. John Seminary is just one of the most beautiful worship spaces I've ever seen in my life outside of Rome. And so a lot of the people we've recruited, they're not interested in going to a 1970s horrific looking church, where somebody's preaching kind of be happy attitudes, so they're looking for somebody who's, they're generally drawn to sacred music and sacred liturgy.
Now, yeah, go ahead.
No, we also have the last all-boys Catholic choir school in the country, St. Paul's Choir School in Harvard Square.
Oh, okay.
And that's a diocesan school. A lot of people think it's an independent school, but it's a spectacularly beautiful school. But only about 40 kids. But the kids are highly sought after because they're not only the discipline, because what they found out is the discipline it takes to perform at a really high level musically translates into the academic area as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very disciplined from a spiritual perspective, and they're very disciplined from an academic perspective because, they have stick-to-itiveness, and that's a quality that's not evenly distributed these days. So that's important.
So with the Catholic Talent Project involved in a diocese or an archdiocese and helping, that's a lot of activity, a lot going on. How is the project supported?
Yeah, so we're supported through nonprofit, philanthropic donations, which, I've been running nonprofits since I was 28. So I'm kind of, an old hand at fundraising or perpetual fundraising. Because I think there's investments that we have to make that don't make economic sense for a diocese to make, because kids, once we have 10 locations, I suspect some of these teachers are going to migrate from location to location to kind of broaden their experience. And some of that might be marital related. They might want to get closer to home, or they might have a serious girlfriend that they're going to end up proposing to, or boyfriend. So there will be some movement. So dioceses have a disincentive to invest a lot in a teacher who might move on. But as I'm building out a national network of faith-filled educators, I have I'm not worried about that at all. And so I'm happy to, raise whatever money it takes to make that happen. And a number of people that have been involved in other lay apostolates. So people have been either big donors or board members of Focus, the Papal Foundation, the
Hmm.
Augustine Institute, the boards on like the Thomas Aquinas College Board and so forth have been very interested in what we're doing. And so they and many other people that I've just known across a lifetime of fundraising have been very interested in being supported. We obviously still need a lot more money. So we
Yeah.
need two things from everybody listening. One is donations and the other is prayers. So in equal measure. So um, I think it's an extraordinary opportunity for people to save a generation of children. And in the process, I believe by saving the generation of children that's now in our Catholic schools, we will in turn save the entire church. Because if we don't stop an 86% failure rate, there will be no future for the Catholic Church of any significance. And at the same time, we're not suggesting that we only serve people who are Catholic, but we're looking for schools to be open to people who are not Catholic,
Hmm.
to welcome people of all faiths and all backgrounds, and spread the joyful message that Catholicism is to everybody that we encounter. And I often hold up John Paul II as an example. He used to take young men hiking and kayaking, and people forget if they know JP2 from when he was older and had Parkinson's. But when he was first Pope, he was a strapping guy in really, really good shape and was hiking the Swiss Alps and Italian Alps that I probably would be wheezing in cardiac arrest if I was doing what he was
Right.
doing at that age. But anyway, he wasn't trying to teach the young men to hike or to kayak. He was beginning a relationship, a personal encounter that led to their conversion.
Hmm.
And so one of the things we're trying to train our St. Thomas More fellows is how to have that kind of deep emotional relationship with children without losing control of your class. Like you can't be their best friends or too chummy with them, but they have to know that you love them, that you care deeply about them. In order for them, if they know that you're invested in them and in their future and their faith, I think you can bring them a long way. But you have to have that connection, and at the same time, you have to develop a connection and a trust among their parents, because we have had cases where kids convert first and then parents then follow along
Right.
later because the kid gets used to going to church. They ask the parents to take them on Sunday. The parents they're Catholic in a Boston sense, but haven't been in a while, and they start taking them. And then the family, I know one case which was not in Boston, but actually a kid who went to the Heights was not particularly religious when he started, became deeply religious at the Heights, which is an Opus Dei school in Potomac, Maryland.
Right.
And then his parents, in turn, who are kind of casual Catholics, I praise them for doing such a great job on raising such a faithful person. And they said they deserve none of the credit that he actually raised them from a faith perspective. So they started going back. And then his mother's mother, who is from Barcelona, who hadn't been in a church in 40 years, when she found out her grandson was going to church and that her daughter had started going to church again, she started going to daily mass and praying the rosary every day. So a kid with an encounter with a bunch of faithful teachers and a spectacular headmaster at the Heights, and that school they have daily mass, which consistent with Catholic free will, nobody actually has to go to, but almost everybody goes to. And as a result, I know a lot of parents who sent their kids to that school. And I in turn have met their kids who are now in their 30s and they're still daily communicants. But it was a practice that was developed when they were in school. And so I've seen it, I've seen it, felt it, touch it. I know it works. I know it can profoundly change people's lives. You could get people to stop compartmentalizing religion as something they do for 1 hour a week on a Sunday, and really just kind of change how they relate to people, and how they do everything. And so that's what we're attempting to do.
So we have an audience that is made up primarily of administrators and teachers, uh, as the majority. If a teacher was listening to you and thought, I've been teaching for a few years now, but I never got this. This is really exciting. Is that a potential person that could become a part of what you're doing?
Right. So we have up until this moment only done brand new teachers, but I'm very interested because I think there's a much larger audience of people out there who are faithful teachers but don't know how to exhibit that in their classroom or how to bring that to life in the classroom. Both either the encounter piece or how do you, I did a video for Edify, which I put on the Catholic Talent Project website. I did a few years, about 3.5 minutes, called Putting the Catholic Back in Catholic Schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so partly you want to have the disposition of an evangelizing person, but you also have to rethink how you teach everything through a Catholic lens. And I think not doing that is actually ahistorical. You can't legitimately teach art, music, architecture, human rights, rights of women, philosophy for sure, or theology without reference to the Catholic Church.
Right.
I mean, think of like, I mean, it's just so when people try to like, in a sense, like take religion out of all that stuff for the sake of separation of church and state, which by the way is, I could spend the whole thing talking about that because it's a bunch of hooey. But so we have in the first, I always joke in the First Amendment, everybody loves the First Amendment, but they keep forgetting that free exercise religion is in there too.
Yeah.
So, but at any rate, so they need to be trained how to do personal encounter and conversion. They need to be trained on how to do lesson plans through a Catholic lens. There's a guy, Brett Salkeld, who's actually in Canada, the 51st state. And I was asked by our Sunday visitor to do the forward for his book. So my name's on the book, even though I didn't write the book. I just wrote the first few pages. But at any rate, I highly recommend the book. And I make no money off of this book. So it's specifically telling people how to make every classroom Catholic. And he goes around the country doing both Canada and the United States, doing professional development for entire faculties of school on how to do it. And there's a project there too for somebody. It's not part of the Catholic Talent Project. Of once we create this merry band of thousands of faithful teachers who are doing this very intentionally, somebody needs to capture all of their lesson plans so that when somebody else wants to do it, they don't have to start from scratch. And so somebody or some foundation or some group of people needs to set up a website of doing searchable lesson plans for almost every aspect of teaching all the major disciplines, but lesson plans that are done through a Catholic lens. And I think it would be a tremendous resource and would take what we're doing and put it on steroids. I think there's no way to get there without first hiring believers as teachers. I think that's the bare minimum step, but that's not the only step. There's a lot more work to be done once we've done that. So I'm focused on the talent side of it because I think we've done a pretty good job in Boston, and I think we know how to do that. But there's other things that people who are more steeped in curriculum should be working on it as well. So I know like Encounter Books has a Golden Fleece project. They're working on history curriculum, kind of as an antidote to the New York Times politically correct history project. And then the Catholic Textbook Project, which Michael Van Hecke, who is also the founder of the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, founded, has also come out with a lot of subject-based textbooks for people to use. Because the mass market textbooks, by and large, minimize, are done in a way to get approved in all the major states that have textbook adoption laws, which include California. So I joked to a priest, like, would you want the political class in California being the curriculum committee for your Catholic school? When you decide to use mass market textbooks, you effectively have made that decision, and it doesn't make any sense. So ultimately, if teachers don't want to do all this work themselves, they do have to have some kind of resource material to use. We need to create a market of materials. It's been done really well on the religion class side. Augustine Institute, Ignatius, they're working together. Sophia Institute up in New Hampshire, I think, is doing a spectacular job. And so, but on the subject-based, the other subjects, which I think all of it should be Catholicized, hasn't been done. And I'm not talking about making things Catholic that aren't Catholic, but certainly for Catholic kids too, there's a couple things that they shouldn't be allowed to graduate without knowing. But one is to not be steeped in or not to have an awareness or an appreciation for the Catholic intellectual tradition and get all the way through Catholic school is, that should be a confessable sin. Anybody who is involved in allowing that to happen. And so that's certainly the other thing is that the Catholic Church, which you and I know, like created Western civilization, not a bad accomplishment for a
No.
religion to pull off, right? And so a lot of kids don't understand where all these things that they take for granted came from. Even like the Catholic Church's position on divorce. At the time that became, the church position, women were considered like property. If they got divorced, they were penniless. They were thrown out. They were homeless in the streets with no assets or resources. There was no, they didn't get any settlements or alimony or anything like that. And so it was an extraordinary progressive position for the Catholic Church to basically say, you can't treat a woman as commodity. We're all created equal. So the fact that a lot of people, don't understand that or have never been taught that. The Catholic Church has the biggest global footprint, service to the poor, the dispossessed, and the marginalized.
Mm-hmm.
So why are kids walking around like if they admit they're Catholic, they look at their shoes when they admit it, like it's something to be embarrassed about? So there's a lot of great stuff there. The other thing is, I think if I have my math right, that somebody who's in 8th grade this fall, that it's the first group of kids that they were not alive at the same time as John Paul II.
Mm-hmm.
So he's at risk of going the way of Winston Churchill, an important historical figure, but for a lot of kids, just like a footnote in a history textbook, where people of, I don't know if we're the same generation, but people of roughly our age, there's no more monumental figure than him in our lifetime, not just in the church, but in the history of the world and collapse of the Berlin Wall and the solidarity movement in Poland. There's like so many different dimensions to it. And so we really need to make a very deliberate effort. I was saying this to George Weigel, I was talking to a couple of years ago. Like, we need to make a very deliberate effort to do like what he's doing for adults, but to do for kids, to make sure that kids really appreciate, one of the longest serving popes made, in the last 500 years, probably one of the most significant theological contributions if you look at all the stuff that he's done. And it would be a shame if a whole generation came along and didn't understand who he was or what he accomplished or what he contributed to the life of the church.
It would be amazing to see what the church is going to look like with the initiatives of the Catholic Talent Project. As you mentioned, the Augustine Institute is doing some great initiatives. Ignatius Press is doing some new book fairs, trying to supplant scholastic books, which has gone very woke, and to me, there's so much there for the future. What do you see that could be the future of Catholic education, say in 10 years?
I don't know if it'll be all in 10 years, but I think the future is very bright. And the reason the kids that I've met, I suppose I shouldn't call them kids because they're adults, but when somebody's 22, 23, I still call them kids. And then I look at all the priests inspired by JP2 Benedict, et cetera, down to the seminarians. They're spectacular. So I really think, I thought when I was in Boston that my job was, and that basically, I think the challenge is making sure that the people older than me don't destroy the church before the people younger than me save it. I think people of my age are kind of this in-between period in which we're too old to be around to save the thing, because too many years, it's going to take to clean up some of the mess that we've inherited. But the cavalry is definitely coming. If you're a young person and you're going to declare yourself Catholic, given how much harassment you get from the broader culture, you have to really mean it. And so I think that's why we have this paradox of hyper-secularization paired with some of the most spectacular displays of faith among the young that this country has probably ever seen. And so I think if the church can survive long enough for them to be in power and the JP2 generation to be a priest to be in power, I think we're going to have an evangelizing church that's going to be spectacular. And I think the Catholic schools can lead the way, and hopefully Catholic Talent Project will be a large part of that.
I couldn't agree more. And of course, you know, those of us with Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative, this is our passion. This is our world as well. And we're so excited to see things happen like the Catholic Talent Project, where young people are challenged, not just given the opportunity, but challenged to look at education, not just as a job, but as a mission, as a vocation, as a calling. And that's truly exciting. Well,
And I think
Tom,
it's just one, which if I just say one more quick thing, which is I
sure.
think, among the people that may be listening, I think for men, it's just a special calling because the church is in many ways has been reliant on women for as long as I can remember, do like almost all the work that upholds the church in a million different ways. And if they all boycotted one day, the church would collapse. But what's missing in the lives of a lot of kids who are in diocesan schools are male faith role models. They could
Right.
come from broken families. They may not know who their father is. They could come from divorce settings. There's just like a million different circumstances. But they've never seen a man who's significant in their life on his knees praying. And so some of the people in the first year, 65% of the people I recruited as fellows were young men, where 95% of the people in elementary schools are female. And
Right.
I got all of them to work in elementary schools. And so I think there's a special obligation for men to kind of carry their weight in saving the church. And these young boys need them. When I go into the classrooms of the young men I recruited, I look at the boys in their nice, neat Catholic rows. They're looking up at these male teachers and just maybe they don't articulate it even to themselves, but their face is saying, "Man, I wish you were my older brother. I wish you were my father." And so that gives them tremendous potential to create a relationship, much in the way JP2 did. It's not the people he was taking hiking were his own children, but he was able to take them on a journey. And I think the men can do that as well. And so the youngest I've been able to get a guide to work is fourth grade, but I've been trying. And that was somebody, Father Roger Landry at Columbia, tipped me off at. And so we needed a Spanish teacher, and he found somebody for me. But I go into the classrooms of all the fellows. At some point, it'd get too big for me to do that. But the impact that these men are having on young boys is incredible. And for all of the moms and dads out there who have daughters, it's slim pickings to find faithful men who want to raise children in virtue the way an awful lot of women do. And so we need to raise up a generation of faithful men. And I think young men being teachers, faithful young men being teachers, is what's going to create that movement.
I couldn't agree more. And I love it when I see, especially men teaching. We have a school here at the parish where I serve, and I love seeing our male teachers working with the young boys and watching the way that they do look up to those men and realize, hey, it's okay to be Catholic. It's okay to be religious. It's okay to pray as a boy, as a man. That this is all
Exactly.
part of who I can be uh, as a disciple. So, uh, so glad, Tom, that we could have this time together to talk about this new venture. I know it's brand new in your life and brand new on, in the Catholic world, but I can't wait to see the impact over these next months and years that we're going to have in schools through the Catholic Talent Project. Now, if people want to find out more about what you're doing, where can they go?
So we have a website, came up about 2 weeks ago, catholictalentproject.org. And if anybody wants to contact me for a follow-up conversation, under the contact tab, there's contact information for me. And under St. Thomas More Fellows, there's contact information for the person who's recruiting teachers. But just go to catholictalentproject.org, and then we can begin a conversation. And again, I would just ask anyone listening to, particularly any parents or grandparents who are worried about the faith of their children or grandchildren, to pray for the success of the Catholic Talent Project.
Amen. I know I will join in that prayer. So, Tom Carroll, thank you so much for being with us on Follow to Lead. What a joy, and just great to see God at work in this very new and powerful way. So, thanks again
Thank
for
you.
being with us.
Much appreciated. Thank you for everything you're doing for Catholic education as well.
And for those that are watching or listening, if you would like to know more about the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative, you can visit our website at diaschools.org. If you haven't already, please either subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow our podcast, and be sure to leave a comment to encourage us toward future programs. May Almighty God bless you.
We'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode of Follow to Lead, a production of the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative. To learn more about finding your own path in your journey of faith, or for more information on what we discussed in today's episode, you are invited to follow us on social media and visit us on the web at diaschools.org. To provide a one-time donation or monthly pledge, please visit our website. Your gift will aid us in providing up-to-date information, additional resources, and other support on how to take Catholic education to a higher level. We look forward to helping you follow God's call to lead others to God right here on Follow to Lead.